Hey everybody, today it's time for another range test. In this corner we have the trusty Ford Mustang Mach-E, the sort of Mustang. This one is rated for 270 miles thanks to its dual motor all-wheel drive system and its big 98.8 kilowatt hour battery pack. And in that corner we have a 2020 Audi e-tron Sportback. This has a range, according to the EPA, of 218 miles, and its battery pack is pretty similarly sized to the Ford at 95 kilowatt hours. Obviously, the usable capacity of both of these battery packs is a little bit lower than the advertised number, but most likely the big reason the e-tron has a shorter EPA range is that it has much wider tires, 255 width tires versus the 225 width tires on this model right here. So let's get these out on the road and see which one goes further. Since so many people ask, let's talk about the drive modes. The Ford Mustang Mach-E is going to be in the whisper mode, which means that we don't have any throttle lift-off regeneration. But of course, both of these vehicles have blended braking systems. The e-tron is going to be in its eco-friendly mode as well. So both of these vehicles are in their most eco-focused modes. By now, you've probably noticed on your screen that it's a fairly overcast day today. I don't know if that's going to continue for the entire trip, but at the moment it does mean that we are using a little bit of energy to heat the cabin in both of these vehicles. It's 55 degrees outside. I realize that's not terribly cold for this time of year in some parts of the United States, but for here in Northern California, it's a moderately chilly day. Now let's talk about the drive route itself. Depending on which mapping tool you want to believe, this is either 244 or 245 miles of driving and would theoretically take a little over 4 hours, assuming there was zero traffic. This is a combination of city streets, not too many miles of city streets, mind you, only about 5 miles collectively. Then the rest of the miles is divvied up basically halvesies between rural highway and freeway driving. We start out in San Jose, California, 5 miles on Interstate 680. The speed limit there is 65 miles an hour. Then 33 miles on US 101. Speed limit there is also 65. Then we hop on California 25 for 75 miles. The speed limit there is theoretically 55 to 60 miles an hour. About 3 miles of that happens in town with speed limits lower around 25 or 40 miles an hour. We then spend 16 miles on California 198 heading back towards the coast of California, followed by a solid 103 miles of travel on US 101. Portions of that drive have speed limits of 70 miles an hour. Portions have a speed limit of 65 miles an hour. We then kick it on back to the office with 5 miles on Interstate 680. I like this drive route because I think it's a good overall example of what you might encounter on a road trip. Some of us definitely live in very flat areas, but this route is not flat at all. We have a total elevation gain and loss of 6,597 feet. The test starts out at an elevation of about 140 feet above sea level, goes to a peak of 1,851 feet, but obviously there are rolling hills involved, and that's how we get to that collective total of just under 6,600 feet of elevation. This is also a combination of rural highways, some city driving, and some higher speed interstate driving, exactly the kind of thing that you would encounter out there on a road trip. Now let's dive into the time-lapse footage. For some reason, a lot of folks want to see time-lapse footage of this sort of test just to make sure that we haven't done anything crazy with the vehicles. The tires were inflated to the factory tire pressure specification on both vehicles. Again, both vehicles were in their most eco-friendly mode according to their manufacturers. And then we did a lead-follow style drive. So I was in the lead for the first half. The Audi e-tron was in the lead for the second half. Now that said, when I've consulted with some aerodynamic experts, they've said that based on the aerodynamic realities involved, proper following distances, and the speeds that we were going, logically the lead follow thing has zero impact on the vehicle's efficiency and range. as with the last range test that I did here on the channel, we've now swapped positions. We're at the halfway point, and now we're going to return on US 101. It looks like I have just under 60% of the battery left, and there is less battery in the Audi. At the moment, my car says I have 140 miles of range. It'll probably go a little bit further. The Audi says it has 112 miles of range left, and it looks like we have 119 miles to the destination. So it may be possible that both of these vehicles will actually get back to this 244 mile round trip. Let's see how this plays out. This test is a good reminder that even though you have reached the halfway point with a little bit more than half of your battery remaining, that does not always mean you'll be able to make it back home. The last portion of this test, the latter half of this test, is at higher speeds on the highway. The speed limit for a large portion of 101 is 70 miles an hour, and there is a little bit of a headwind, about 10 miles an hour of headwind on this day that we were driving. So even though the first half of this test involved going up and over a lot of mountain passes and a lot of hilly area, and the second half of the test is more or less a level run, you'll notice that you actually end up using more energy simply because of the higher speeds. And that's why by the time we got to Gilroy, California, the e-tron was showing 5% of its battery remaining. It could have gone another perhaps 15 miles or so and ended up at basically the same charging location as the Tesla Model Y the last time that I tested it, which was in South San Jose. At that point in the test, according to the Mach-E, it had 28% of its battery left. It was showing about 85 to 90 miles of range, depending on exactly how you want to calculate that out. 34.9 miles later, I was back at my start point, and the Mach-E was still showing us a theoretical total range of about 270 to 280 miles. Interesting twist with the Mach-E is that the range-o-meter is not terribly accurate at the beginning of your journey, but as with most EVs, by the time you get down there towards 20% of the battery, it ends up being a little bit more accurate. But the Mach-E has a pretty decent range to it. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we have narrower tires than the e-tron, however. I want to say a big thank you to Andy, who not only let us use his e-tron, but drove it himself for this entire day here. I've now abandoned him at the Electrify America charging station in Gilroy. So when it comes right down to it, the e-tron and the Tesla Model Y actually have a shockingly similar range, because in the recent test, where another viewer provided their Tesla Model Y, he made it up to a charging station in South San Jose. It's really only about another 10 miles or so down the road from the Electrify America charging station right here in Gilroy. I, on the other hand, have 28% of my battery. The e-tron has 5% of its battery left, so I will be just fine getting back to my origin here. And according to the vehicle, I will still have about 40 miles of range left once I get back to the office. So let's see how that pans out. Based on the testing conditions today, the Audi e-tron gets a real-world range score of 225 miles, pretty darn close to what Audi says you should get out of that vehicle, and the Mustang Mach-E gets around 275, also really close to what Ford says you should get out of the Mach-E. Keep in mind that there are a ton of variables involved in electric vehicle range, so this range test is appropriate for the conditions that you witnessed in the time-lapse footage. A relatively mild day, good road conditions, it wasn't wet, it wasn't snowy, it wasn't sleeting, anything like that. We weren't just blasting the air conditioning, and most importantly, we weren't really using the heater terribly much. Also, not much energy was consumed conditioning the battery. All of those will impact your real-world range. Be sure and let me know what you think about that in the comments section below, and if you want to volunteer your EV, you can always reach out to us at itsaconspiracy@alexonautos.com and let us know what you have that you would like to go on a drive route. I would say that anything that you want to put on this drive route is going to need to have a range of about 180 miles or so, perhaps about 200 miles just to be safe, so you would actually get to a DC fast charge point that you can use on US 101. Anything shorter than that will just get stuck back in a rural section of California, and that just would not be a very good day. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.